Some promises are never spoken aloud. They arrive disguised as impossible choices. The first time Nathan Cole saw Evelyn Whitmore, she wasn't standing at the head of a boardroom like every business magazine had promised. She sat alone beside a floor-to-ceiling window in the top suite of Whitmore Biotech's headquarters. Her wheelchair turned toward the Chicago skyline as snow drifted across the glass in slow, silent waves. The city below buzzed with ambition, but inside the room, everything felt strangely still. Nathan paused outside the open door, holding a folder that wasn't his and wearing the only navy blazer he owned. It had belonged to his late father, and although the sleeves were slightly short, it was pressed with care. He hadn't come looking for a new beginning. He had come because his 9-year-old son, Liam, needed heart surgery before spring, and every estimate from every hospital had ended the same way. More money than a maintenance technician could earn in years. Across the room, attorneys spoke in measured voices while members of the Whitmore family's legal team exchanged documents thicker than phone books. No one smiled. No one congratulated anyone. It felt less like preparing for a wedding and more like negotiating a merger between strangers. Nathan cleared his throat softly as an elderly attorney approached him. "Mr. Cole," the man said, adjusting his glasses, "before we proceed, I want you to understand that Miss Whitmore requested complete honesty. You are free to walk away." Nathan looked past him toward Evelyn. She never turned around. She continued watching the snow as if the conversation belonged to someone else's life. "Can I ask her one question?" Nathan replied quietly. The attorney nodded. Nathan stepped closer, careful not to disturb the silence filling the office. "Miss Whitmore," she answered without facing him. "Yes. Do you want this marriage?" Several lawyers immediately stopped writing. The room held its breath. Evelyn lowered her eyes before speaking with calm honesty. "No." She finally turned toward him. Her expression carried no anger, no bitterness, only exhaustion that seemed older than her 34 years. "But my father's will says I lose controlling interest in the company if I'm unmarried by the end of this month. The board is already waiting for me to fail." Nathan listened without interrupting. She studied him with the same quiet curiosity. "And your son?" she asked. He nodded once. "He deserves every chance I can give him." Another silence settled between them, gentler this time. It wasn't built from suspicion. It was built from two people recognizing hardship in someone they had just met. Nathan offered the smallest smile. "Then maybe neither of us is here because we stopped believing. Maybe we're here because we're still trying." Something shifted behind Evelyn's steady eyes. Not affection, not trust, just surprise. Most people pitied her before they spoke. Others admired her fortune before they noticed the wheelchair. Nathan had done neither. He had simply answered her as one human being speaking to another. The attorneys resumed arranging paperwork. Pens clicked. Pages turned. Outside, the snowfall thickened until the skyline almost disappeared behind white clouds. Inside that quiet office, two strangers signed documents neither had imagined signing, not because love had found them, but because life had cornered them both into choosing hope over surrender. Nathan moved into Whitmore House 3 days later with one suitcase, a toolbox that had seen better years, and a backpack that belonged to Liam. The estate stretched across nearly 6 acres on the northern edge of Chicago, surrounded by towering oak trees and perfectly trimmed gardens that looked too precise to belong to real life. Everything inside reflected quiet wealth. Marble floors, handcrafted woodwork, paintings older than anyone living beneath the roof. Yet despite all its beauty, the mansion felt strangely empty, like a place built to impress visitors instead of welcoming people home. Liam stepped carefully across the polished floor, staring at the enormous staircase. "Dad," he whispered, "does anyone actually live here?" Nathan smiled softly. "I think we are about to find out." Upstairs, Evelyn heard the child's voice through the partially open library door. She closed the financial report resting on her lap and listened. It had been months since laughter had reached this side of the house. She almost forgot what it sounded like. Her house manager, Margaret, entered carrying a tablet. "Would you like me to prepare the West Wing for Mr. Cole?" Evelyn nodded without looking away from the window. "Give him the guest suite near the garden." Margaret hesitated. "The room next to yours would be more practical." Evelyn answered calmly. "Practical is not always comfortable." Nathan spent the afternoon learning the routines of a home that seemed to operate like a luxury hotel. Every employee had schedules timed to the minute. Meals appeared without anyone asking. Lights adjusted themselves as evening approached. Even silence seemed organized. He thanked every member of the staff by name after introducing himself. Some looked surprised. Others smiled for the first time all day. Before dinner, Nathan noticed one of the gardeners struggling with a loose irrigation pipe beside the greenhouse. Without saying anything, he rolled up his sleeves and spent 20 minutes tightening the connection using tools from his truck. When the water finally flowed correctly again, the elderly gardener chuckled. Most people living here would have called maintenance. Nathan wiped his hands on an old cloth. Old habits are hard to replace. Unknown to both men, Evelyn had watched the entire exchange through the sunroom windows. He never looked toward the cameras. He never waited for praise. He simply solved the problem and quietly walked back inside. Dinner arrived exactly at 6:30. The dining table could have seated 20 people, but only 3 plates rested at one end. Liam looked overwhelmed by the polished silverware. Nathan quietly exchanged the expensive utensils for a regular fork from the serving station. "This one feels more like home," he said with a wink. Liam laughed. Evelyn noticed every detail. No performance. No attempt to impress her. Only a father making sure his son felt safe in an unfamiliar place. Halfway through the meal, Liam accidentally spilled a glass of apple juice across the white tablecloth. The room froze. 2 attendants instinctively stepped forward. Liam's smile disappeared. "I am sorry," he whispered, lowering his eyes. Nathan reached for a folded napkin before anyone else could react. "Looks like the table was thirsty." Liam blinked before letting out a nervous little laugh. Nathan cleaned the spill without the slightest sign of frustration. Evelyn watched the exchange in silence. She remembered expensive dinners from her own childhood, where one mistake meant an evening of disappointment. She looked at Liam, then at Nathan, and quietly dismissed the attendants with a gentle nod. "It is only juice," she said. The staff stepped back. The conversation resumed. Outside, evening settled over the estate as warm lights reflected across the snowy gardens. For the first time in years, Whitmore House sounded less like a museum and more like a place where people might eventually belong. The following evening arrived wrapped in heavy clouds, and just after sunset the entire neighborhood disappeared into darkness. A transformer several blocks away had failed beneath the weight of freezing rain, leaving Whitmore House without electricity for the first time in years. Emergency generators powered only the security systems and a few hallway lights, leaving the grand mansion strangely quiet beneath the soft glow of battery lanterns. Staff members hurried through the corridors carrying flashlights, while maintenance crews estimated at least 3 hours before full power could return. Margaret apologized repeatedly as candles were placed throughout the dining room, but Nathan only smiled. "Looks like the house gets a night off too." Liam looked toward the ceiling. "Does that mean no television?" Nathan laughed gently. "Tonight we have something better." He gathered several blankets from the family room and spread them across the hardwood floor near the stone fireplace, where the remaining warmth still lingered. The fire itself had long since faded, but the room felt welcoming in the candlelight. Liam pulled a small box of building blocks from his backpack and poured them onto the blanket with a cheerful clatter. "Tell me another story," he asked, settling beside his father. Nathan leaned back against the sofa. "Only if you help me build the spaceship this time." Upstairs, Evelyn sat alone in her study listening to the muffled sounds echoing through the quiet house. At first she assumed the staff was still moving furniture or checking generators, but then she heard something she had not expected. A child laughed. It was bright, unforced, and completely out of place inside walls that had grown accustomed to silence. Curiosity slowly replaced routine. She guided her wheelchair into the hallway and followed the sound until she reached the balcony overlooking the family room below. Hidden behind the carved wooden railing, she watched without announcing herself. Nathan and Liam had transformed the floor into an imaginary galaxy built from colorful blocks, books, pillows, and folded blankets. Nathan spoke in dramatic voices as tiny explorers searched for invisible planets where kindness was considered the greatest treasure in the universe. Liam interrupted every few sentences with impossible questions that made Nathan laugh even harder. Neither of them noticed they had an audience. Evelyn rested her hands quietly on the armrests of her chair. Months earlier, specialists had suggested music therapy motivational speakers, mindfulness coaches, and luxury wellness retreats to improve her emotional health after the accident. None of them had managed to quiet the loneliness that followed her home every evening. Yet somehow the simple sound of a father giving his full attention to his son reached places expensive solutions never had. Nathan looked at the unfinished spaceship and deliberately attached one wing upside down. Liam burst into laughter. "Dad, that thing cannot even fly straight." Nathan shrugged with complete seriousness. "Maybe it is exploring sideways." The boy laughed so hard he nearly tipped over onto the blankets. Before she realized what was happening, Evelyn smiled. It was small, almost unfamiliar, but real. She remained there several minutes longer, saying nothing, allowing the warmth below to settle gently over the empty corners of the house. When she finally turned back toward her room, she noticed something surprising. For the first time since returning from the rehabilitation hospital, she was not counting the hours until morning. She was simply looking forward to hearing another story tomorrow. The lights returned just before dawn, but something inside Whitmore House had quietly changed during the darkness. Breakfast arrived with its usual precision, fresh fruit arranged perfectly, coffee poured into delicate china, newspapers folded beside every plate. Yet the room no longer felt as formal as it had only a week before. Liam was sketching rockets on the corner of a paper napkin while Nathan read through the weather forecast. Across the table, Evelyn reviewed reports on her tablet, though her attention drifted more often than she realized. Liam suddenly held up his drawing. "Miss Evelyn, do you think astronauts ever get scared?" Nathan glanced toward his son with a gentle smile, but said nothing. Evelyn studied the crayon sketch before answering. "I think they probably do." Liam frowned. "Then why do they still go?" She paused longer this time. "Because some journeys matter more than fear." The boy nodded as if that explained everything and returned to his breakfast. Nathan quietly looked toward Evelyn. That was a good answer. She simply lowered her eyes to her coffee, hiding a smile that almost appeared. Later that afternoon, Nathan noticed one of the ramps leading into the winter garden had become slightly uneven after weeks of freezing temperatures. He grabbed a toolbox from the maintenance shed without asking anyone for permission. Nearly an hour later, he was tightening bolts beneath the wooden platform while humming softly to himself. Evelyn approached through the glass corridor, rolling toward the entrance before stopping several feet away. "You know there is an entire facilities department for that," she said. Nathan looked up with an easy grin. "I know, but I was already standing here." She watched him adjust the final support until the ramp rested perfectly level. He stood, brushed the dust from his hands, and stepped aside. "Would you mind checking it?" Evelyn hesitated before guiding her wheelchair forward. The wheels crossed the repaired surface without the slightest vibration. Smooth, quiet, effortless. She looked back at him. "Thank you." Nathan shrugged gently. It should work the way it was meant to. They continued through the garden together beneath the glass ceiling where winter sunlight filtered across rows of orchids and evergreen plants. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Finally, Evelyn broke it. "Most people rush over the moment they see my wheelchair." Nathan nodded. "I noticed." She looked ahead. "They ask what I need before asking where I want to go." Nathan stopped walking beside her and answered with complete sincerity. "That is because they see the chair first." Evelyn turned toward him. "And you?" He smiled quietly. "I see the person deciding where the chair is headed." The words settled gently between them. There was no dramatic reaction, no sudden confession. Only a long breath Evelyn had not realized she had been holding for months. As they reached the far end of the garden, Liam came running across the stone path carrying a small paper airplane. He slowed before reaching Evelyn, careful not to startle her. "Would you launch it for me?" he asked. She looked at the folded airplane in surprise. "Why me?" Liam answered with complete certainty. "Because you always know where things should go." Nathan said nothing. He simply watched as Evelyn accepted the paper airplane with both hands, aimed it toward the bright afternoon light, and gave it the gentlest push. It floated farther than any of them expected, gliding gracefully above the flowers before landing softly near the fountain. Liam cheered as though he had witnessed something extraordinary. Nathan smiled at his son, but his eyes drifted back toward Evelyn. For the first time since they had met, she was not thinking about everything she had lost. She was quietly discovering what still belonged to her. Monday morning arrived beneath a pale winter sky as Blacktown cars lined the entrance of Whitmore Biotech headquarters. Investors, attorneys, and board members stepped through the revolving doors carrying leather portfolios and quiet expectations. The quarterly leadership meeting had been moved forward without Evelyn's approval, and the timing felt too deliberate to be a coincidence. Margaret adjusted Evelyn's coat before they left the house. Several directors have requested a vote regarding executive leadership, she said carefully. Evelyn gave a slow nod. I expected this day would come. Nathan overheard the conversation while helping Liam zip his backpack before school. He looked toward Evelyn, but offered no advice. Instead, he simply asked, "What time should I pick you up?" She answered after a brief pause. "Do not change your day because of mine." Nathan smiled gently. "I was planning to keep my promise anyway." At headquarters, the atmosphere felt colder than the weather outside. Executives exchanged polite greetings that carried little warmth beneath them. As Evelyn approached the executive conference floor, she noticed something unusual. The temporary accessibility ramp leading into the boardroom had disappeared. In its place stood 3 polished marble steps, small enough to seem accidental, large enough to stop her completely. Several board members looked away. Others pretended not to notice. One director quietly cleared his throat. "It appears facilities is running behind schedule." No one volunteered a solution. Nathan had arrived moments earlier after dropping Liam at school. He stood near the rear hallway waiting with a folder Evelyn had forgotten on the kitchen counter. His eyes immediately found the missing ramp. He said nothing. He simply walked toward a maintenance storage room he had noticed during an earlier visit. Inside were aluminum staging panels, adjustable supports, heavy-duty locking pins, and portable safety rails used during building renovations. Within minutes, he located 2 maintenance employees preparing equipment for another project. "Would you mind giving me a hand?" he asked with calm confidence. There was no panic in his voice, no accusation, just purpose. Together, they measured the height of the steps, assembled a temporary access platform, secured every locking pin, and tested each connection twice before placing non-slip panels across the surface. The entire process took less than 15 minutes. Upstairs, impatient conversations filled the boardroom. One investor glanced toward his watch. "Perhaps we should begin." Before anyone could answer, the conference room doors opened. Evelyn rolled forward across the newly built ramp with steady confidence. Nathan remained several feet behind, quietly carrying the folder she had forgotten. No announcement was made. No one explained where the ramp had come from. Yet every conversation in the room stopped. The chairman slowly stood. One by one, the remaining directors followed, not because protocol required it, because they suddenly realized they had nearly allowed a preventable obstacle to speak louder than the woman leading the company. Evelyn entered without lowering her eyes. She positioned her wheelchair at the head of the conference table and opened the presentation herself. "Good morning," she said with calm authority. "Since everyone is here, let us discuss the future instead of the furniture." A few restrained smiles appeared around the room. Even those who had questioned her leadership looked unexpectedly uncomfortable. From the back of the room, Nathan quietly placed the forgotten folder beside her laptop before stepping away without waiting for recognition. Evelyn glanced at the folder, then briefly looked toward him. Their eyes met for only a second. No words were necessary. She understood exactly what he had protected that morning. It was never her pride. It was her chance to enter the room on her own terms. The drive home passed in comfortable silence as the city lights reflected across the windshield like scattered stars. Nathan kept both hands on the steering wheel while soft jazz played through the speakers at barely more than a whisper. Evelyn sat beside him watching familiar streets drift past, but her thoughts remained inside the boardroom. For the first time since her accident, she had entered a room without feeling as though everyone was waiting to see whether she would succeed or struggle. Nathan had never asked for credit. He had simply noticed a problem and quietly removed it. That difference stayed with her. Back at Whitmore House, Liam had already finished his homework and fallen asleep on the living room sofa with a science book resting across his chest. Nathan carefully lifted the blanket over his son without waking him. Evelyn watched from the hallway. Every movement was patient. Every gesture carried the confidence of someone who had repeated the same quiet acts of love for years. "He sleeps deeply," she said. Nathan smiled softly. "He trusts that someone is watching over him." The words lingered long after Liam disappeared upstairs. Later that evening, Margaret knocked gently on Nathan's study door, carrying a sealed envelope. "This was delivered for you while you were away." Nathan thanked her and opened it without much thought. Inside was a statement from Children's Memorial Hospital showing that the entire balance for Liam's upcoming heart surgery had been paid in full. He frowned, convinced there had been a mistake. He checked the patient number twice. The amount due read $0. At the bottom of the page, the payment source appeared only as a private charitable trust. Nathan quietly walked downstairs where Margaret was arranging fresh flowers near the foyer. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked, handing her the statement. Margaret recognized it immediately, but hesitated. Her loyalty battled with her conscience for only a moment. Finally she spoke. "Miss Whitmore instructed us never to mention it." Nathan looked confused. "Mention what?" Margaret lowered her voice. "She established the trust 2 months ago. The hospital contacted our legal office after your son's case was reviewed. She asked that every invoice be paid anonymously because she believed you would refuse help if you knew." Nathan stared at the paper without speaking. His first instinct was to return the money. His second was to ask why. Instead, he folded the statement carefully and walked toward the winter garden where Evelyn often ended her evenings. She sat beneath the glass ceiling watching snowflakes collect along the edges of the fountain. She heard him approach, but did not turn around. "Margaret told you," she said quietly. Nathan nodded once. "Why did you not tell me?" Evelyn rested her hands on the wheels of her chair. "Because your dignity mattered more than my gratitude." He remained silent. She continued after a long breath. "You have spent every day protecting my independence without making me feel fragile. I wanted to help your son without making you feel indebted." Nathan looked across the silent garden before answering. "You trusted me enough to protect my pride." Evelyn finally met his eyes. "You were the first person who protected mine." Neither of them spoke again. Outside, fresh snow covered every path leading through the garden, erasing old footprints beneath a quiet blanket of white. Inside, two people who had entered each other's lives as strangers began to understand that the greatest acts of kindness were often the ones no one was ever supposed to discover. 1 week later, the city gathered inside the Grand Lakes Convention Center for Whitmore Biotech's annual Global Innovation Summit. More than 2,000 investors, physicians, researchers, employees, and journalists filled the auditorium beneath towering screens that displayed the company's newest medical technologies. Every major business network had sent reporters. Industry analysts whispered predictions about Evelyn's future before the event even began. Some believed she would appear only through a pre-recorded message. Others expected another executive to speak in her place. Rumors always traveled faster than truth. Backstage, assistants made final adjustments while production managers counted down the remaining minutes. Evelyn sat quietly beside the entrance tunnel, reviewing her speech one final time. Her hands rested calmly on the folder, but Nathan noticed the faint tightening of her fingers. He stepped beside her without interrupting the silence. "Nervous?" he asked softly. She smiled with surprising honesty. "More than I expected." Nathan looked toward the brightly lit stage where thousands of empty seats stretched beyond the curtains. "They are waiting to hear your voice," he said. "Not to judge how you arrive." Evelyn closed the folder. "I spent months trying to hide this chair whenever cameras appeared." Nathan nodded. "I know." She looked down. "I thought if people only saw strength, they would still believe in me." Nathan answered after a thoughtful pause. "Real strength never asks people to ignore the truth." She slowly lifted her eyes toward him. "It asks them to see all of it." The stage manager approached with a headset. "Miss Whitmore, we are ready whenever you are." Evelyn inhaled deeply before guiding her wheelchair toward the entrance. Nathan did not push. He did not walk beside her. He simply remained several steps behind where she could no longer see him, but could still feel the quiet confidence of someone who believed she did not need rescuing. The lights dimmed across the auditorium as the announcer welcomed the audience. Applause echoed through the massive hall. Then the curtains opened. Evelyn rolled forward alone beneath the bright, white lights. For a brief second, the room fell completely silent. Thousands of faces watched without moving. There was no dramatic music, no carefully staged reveal. Only a woman in a wheelchair crossing the stage with calm determination. She stopped at the center podium and looked across the audience before speaking. "Good morning. For a long time, I believed leadership meant pretending nothing had changed. I was wrong. The silence deepened. This chair changed my life. It changed how I entered buildings. It changed how strangers looked at me. It even changed how I looked at myself. But it never changed my purpose. Cameras flashed across the auditorium. No one interrupted. Our company exists to improve lives. If I cannot stand before you today, then I will gladly lead from where I am. Because courage is not measured in steps. It is measured in the decision to keep moving forward. The first applause began somewhere near the back of the hall. Then another section joined. Within seconds, the entire audience rose to its feet. Not because they pitied her. Not because they admired perfection. They stood because they recognized honesty. Backstage, Nathan watched quietly as tears gathered in Margaret's eyes. Several employees embraced each other without speaking. Nathan simply smiled to himself. This was the impossible miracle everyone had been waiting to witness. It was never about standing up from a wheelchair. It was about standing before the world without hiding behind anything at all. The days that followed felt lighter, though nothing about their routines had changed. Nathan still drove Liam to school every morning before heading to the hospital for his maintenance shift. Evelyn still spent long hours leading meetings, reviewing research proposals, and making difficult decisions that affected thousands of employees. Yet somewhere between those ordinary moments, Whitmore House no longer felt borrowed. It felt lived in. One Saturday morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows as the smell of fresh pancakes drifted into every hallway. Nathan stood at the stove wearing the same faded apron Liam had insisted was lucky. Batter dotted the countertop, blueberries rolled across a cutting board, and laughter bounced gently against the high ceilings. Evelyn entered quietly, expecting the room to fall silent the way people usually reacted when she appeared. Instead, Nathan looked over his shoulder with an easy smile. Good timing. We almost started eating without our toughest food critic. Liam grinned from his chair. Miss Evelyn always knows if the pancakes are too crispy. She laughed softly before she could stop herself. That is because your father gets distracted when you tell stories. Nathan placed another pancake onto the plate. Fair point. They ate together without discussing business, hospital appointments, or legal agreements. They talked about Liam's science project, the robin building a nest outside the library window, and whether maple syrup belonged on waffles more than pancakes. It was wonderfully ordinary. After breakfast, Liam disappeared upstairs to gather supplies for his school presentation, leaving Nathan and Evelyn alone in the quiet kitchen. Nathan began washing dishes while Evelyn organized cups on the drying rack beside him. Neither mentioned how unusual the moment would have seemed only weeks earlier. A gentle knock interrupted the calm. Margaret entered carrying a large envelope from Liam's elementary school. This arrived by courier. Nathan opened it and smiled immediately. Liam had won first place in the district science competition and would present his project at the state showcase the following month. Before Nathan could say anything, Liam came racing down the stairs. Did they send it? He asked breathlessly. Nathan nodded and held up the certificate. The boy jumped with excitement before stopping in front of Evelyn. His smile softened. I could not have finished the model without your engineering books. Evelyn touched the edge of the certificate. You did all the hard work. Liam thought for a second before answering in the simple way only children could. Maybe, but people do better when someone believes they can. The room became unexpectedly quiet. Nathan lowered his eyes. Margaret discreetly stepped into the hallway. Liam hugged the certificate against his chest, then looked at Evelyn with complete innocence. Can I ask you something? She smiled. Of course. He hesitated only a moment. Would it be all right if I stopped calling you Miss Evelyn? She looked at him with gentle curiosity. What would you like to call me? Liam shrugged as though the answer had always been obvious. Mom feels right. Time itself seemed to pause. Nathan never corrected him. Evelyn never expected those words. Tears quietly filled her eyes as she reached for Liam's hand. She did not answer immediately because some moments deserved silence before words. Finally, she whispered, I would be honored. Across the kitchen, Nathan watched the two of them together and realized that families were not always built by blood or circumstance. Sometimes they were built one quiet act of kindness at a time, until one ordinary morning someone accidentally spoke the truth that every heart in the room had already begun to believe. Spring arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, until the first warm breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias through the gardens of Whitmore House. The snow had disappeared weeks earlier, replaced by green lawns where Liam now spent his afternoons launching homemade model rockets toward the wide blue sky. Nathan sat on the porch steps, sanding a small wooden birdhouse they had promised to build together, while Evelyn reviewed documents beside him with a cup of coffee resting comfortably on the arm of her wheelchair. The silence between them no longer needed filling. It had become its own language. Liam sprinted across the yard chasing another crooked flight path before laughing as the little rocket landed safely in the grass. Nathan looked up from the birdhouse. I think that one flew farther than the last. Liam grinned. Only because Mom calculated the angle. Evelyn smiled without lifting her eyes from the papers. Engineering helps. Nathan chuckled softly. Confidence helps more. She closed the folder and looked out across the peaceful yard. Do you remember the first question you asked me? Nathan pretended to think. I have asked quite a few. She laughed quietly. No, the very first one. He nodded as the memory returned. I asked whether you wanted the marriage. Evelyn rested both hands gently on her lap. No one had asked me what I wanted in a very long time. A gentle breeze carried the sound of birds through the trees. Nathan leaned back against the porch railing. I was not trying to solve anything. I just thought you deserved to answer for yourself. Evelyn watched Liam kneel beside a patch of flowers, carefully rescuing a ladybug from the sidewalk before placing it safely onto a leaf. She smiled at the familiar kindness. Everyone around me spent months trying to help me walk again, she said quietly. Doctors, specialists, therapists, investors. They all wanted to fix what they could see. Nathan remained silent, allowing her words to settle naturally. Finally, she turned toward him. You never tried to fix me. Nathan met her eyes with the same calm expression she had come to trust. Because I never believed you were broken. The afternoon seemed to pause around them. Even the breeze softened. Evelyn's eyes glistened with quiet gratitude. You gave me something much harder than walking again. Nathan tilted his head slightly. What was that? She smiled, the kind of smile that reached every corner of her face. You gave me the courage to stop walking through life alone. Nathan reached over and gently rested his hand beside hers without saying another word. It was enough. Across the yard, Liam looked back toward the porch and smiled as though he had always known this day would come. He picked up his rocket and ran toward them, laughter filling the warm spring air once more. The great house that had once echoed with loneliness now carried ordinary sounds that mattered far more than wealth or reputation. A father sanding unfinished wood. A remarkable woman no longer hiding from the world. A little boy dreaming bigger every day. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that life becomes easier. It is that kindness quietly gives people the strength to become themselves again, and in doing so, turns strangers into the family they never knew they had been searching for.